We might have a few more people that join in the next few moments. So as people are just joining, I am going to start to welcome everyone and introduce our artist talk for this evening. It's great to see lots of familiar names and new names, and I'm just glad that you were all able to join us tonight. My name is Heidi Leitsky. I'm an assistant professor of art and the director of the Eckert, the Susan C. and Gerald C. Eckert Art Gallery here at Millersville University, and that's where I am tonight. So I'm really grateful to be here with all this fantastic work. I just want to start off with a few thank yous to Keston for tonight's tech support, and many thanks to DJ Ramsey for building our online exhibition. I want to tell you a little bit about the format for tonight's artist talk, so you kind of know what to expect. After my introduction, I'm going to turn it over to David, who will share more about himself and his work and context and show us some images. And we're just going to ask that you hold your questions until the end of his talk, at which point I will moderate a time of Q&A. So David B. Smith received his MFA from Bard College and lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. He's been awarded residencies at Apex Art, Socrates Sculpture Park, the Malay Colony, among many others. His work has been exhibited around the world at places including MoMA PS1, Halsey McKay Gallery, Plant House, Spring Break Art Show, and many more. I first found David's work on Instagram, if I remember correctly, through a mutual art world friend. And I really immediately responded to the lush, tactile quality of his work. At that time, I think he was working on some large-scale pieces that were installed outside. So there was this fascinating play between the woven textile forms that were soft and looked like you want to hug them, but then there were these brick walls that they were kind of surrounded by, and there was this kind of unexpected and intriguing conversation, and I just wanted to know more about him and his work. So about a year ago, last October, we started talking about the possibility of a show of his work here at Millersville, and I can't believe it's already been almost a year. So in the spring, when COVID hit, I really wasn't sure what would happen to the show or what would be possible in the gallery this semester. I didn't know if campus would be open or if everything was going to go virtual. So I'm really grateful that I was working with David, because he was really willing to imagine a possibility for this exhibition that went beyond these four walls and grew into a really robust online experience, so that students and art enthusiasts near and far can really engage with this project. I'm excited for you all to hear what he has to share tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to David.
Great, thank you so much, Heidi. I'm imagining you can all see me. And I'm really happy you are all here and that you invited me to give this talk tonight, and also that I was able to work with you and your community, Heidi, to put on this exhibition. All the people there, many of who you mentioned, who put in a lot of work and expertise and thought into putting this together, including DJ, Steph, who did the lighting and built the pedestal, and also Danny, who was one of the students who actually helped a lot in the layout, and a bunch of other students who helped move work and other things. It's like a real community thing, and the work itself community is important to me in my work, so it was great to get to engage with you, and I look forward to engaging more in the future as the show opens and stays open for a while, at least a couple months. So yeah, I wanted to just give a little talk tonight about a little bit about more of who I am and of my community, and then also go into how I got to making textiles in the first place. This particular show is sort of a tracking of my textile, the beginning of my textile practice in 2013 until now. And I'm going to talk a little bit how I got to that place in 2013. But before that, I'll just tell you about who I am. And my name is David B. Smith. The B is for Benjamin. And I'm a third generation immigrant of Jewish descent. I go by he, him pronouns, and I am part of a large community of artists and family members, friends, many other community members of diverse genders, cultures, nationalities, races, etc. And I like to define myself and in relation to what's around me, who's around me, things, people, places, history, actions. So that's a lot of what my work is about. So that's exciting that I get to introduce myself that way, because that's part of my work. And I also think about myself in relation to my past and my future, or the past and the future, in whichever order you want to look at it. In the past, I think about my parents, my mother, Deborah Smith, who is a retired writer and editor, my father, Joshua Smith, who's no longer around, but he was a art curator and collector. And his parents, his father, Jack Smith, was a textile designer and producer, and his wife, Stella Smith, was a practicer of home crafts, including pottery, textiles, and carved stoneware. And I forgot to mention my mom's mom, Evelyn Takiff, was also a practicer of home crafts, and also had a master's in music, and taught me and my sister and my cousins how to do pottery and all kinds of other crafts growing up. So, not to mention all the extended family, many Jewish people in my family did a lot in the textile industry. And I see myself as sort of an extension of that, but also part of my work is redefining who I am and reinventing and forging forward into new possibilities and new ways of being. I live in Lenape-Hoking, also known as Brooklyn, and I'm in Greenpoint with my partner, Tanya Marquardt, who's a writer and performer. And yeah, this is my house right here, so welcome. And now I'm going to go into my work. We're starting sort of a little bit before I go into the images. As a kid, I was kind of a quiet kid, didn't really talk much, kind of struggled to put my ideas into words. And I think part of that was genetic, inherited trauma from my Jewish ancestry. Also, I lived in Washington, D.C., which was very segregated at the time, and I saw a lot of sort of structural racism going on, a lot of violence in the African-American low-income community particularly, and a lot of people of middle and upper income seeming to sort of blame poor people for their problems. So I just sort of had a lot of anger, frustration, but also as a kid, I just didn't know what was going on and what was right, and it just didn't seem right. But so I kind of, my voice was kind of stifled, and a lot of my work is about trying to uncover that voice, trying to dig up that identity. So as I said, my dad was a collector and curator, and he exposed us to a lot of art growing up. But ironically, at the time, I really didn't enjoy the art, and I found it very frustrating. I didn't know what it was about. I didn't know why anyone cared. And in retrospect, I can see, you know, art is intimidating. It is hard to understand it. And I think I later understood it as a code like a secret code that people are sort of using to speak to each other about their inner wishes, desires, their criticisms, their thoughts about the world. And so when I went to college, I was really interested in psychology and the way people think, the way people choose how to be, how to act. And I studied psychology, but then I switched to art history. I think because of my background in art, I kind of made that leap to say, well, art is a way that people, is a record of the way people think. So if I could study art history, I could study these documents of ways of thinking and being. So I got an art history degree, and then my last semester, I thought, well, I want to be the artist now, just to try it. And that was kind of like a whole new thing, because not only was I looking at other people and I was able to actually explain what was going on in my own mind through my art, which I felt was like really empowering and really exciting, although I still didn't know what I was trying to say. So I moved to New York City after college and spent about 8 years working in galleries, museums, and for artists, just really looking and experiencing any kind of art and culture I could, and just taking thousands of photographs, eventually putting together a portfolio and applying to grad school. And that's where I'm going to start showing you the images. I guess um, the one thing I could say about grad school is I learned that photography does not tell the truth. In fact, it only tells some fragment or some fabrication of reality. But to me, that was so exciting, because it was like you can actually fabricate reality with photography. And also by doing so, you can point out the way that photography can be used to manipulate people, to lie to them and to create narratives that aren't real, and to kind of prey upon their belief systems. So that's what I kind of took up as my work. So let me share my screen with you, and I'll show you some images leading up to how I got into textiles. And then we'll give a little introduction to the show that Heidi's in right now. Okay, so I think you can see it. This is me. It's sort of a self-portrait. I'm not going to show you like maybe 2 pictures from grad school, but one thing I didn't mention right before I went, this is like a big thing to mention, but right before I went into grad school, my father committed suicide. So I was quite dealing with a lot of loss, a lot of confusion, anger, dissonance, and I just kind of I didn't really know like what was in store for me, or so a lot of what I did in graduate school was try to sort of explore those feelings of disillusionment, of frustration, but also in this picture kind of like of rebirth and kind of a new beginning, a new possibilities. How could I use art to talk about loss? How could I use art to talk about healing and potentially share that with my viewers and my community? This is called Filling the Void. And then this is an image, it's sort of just kind of a random image of a collage, because collage at that time became like a huge thing for me, because it really allowed me to talk about this confusion that I was feeling, this fragmentation and this layering of different realities and times and spaces that I was experiencing, and that I think we all experience in various ways. And I show you this now because much of my work can be seen through this lens of collage. And I have an active collage practice, digital and physical, all the time, but I don't really show it as my work. It's more my source material, which I then turn into my work, and plays a large part in my textile practice. But I kept going with it. This is actually a digital collage. It's sort of a fractal kind of thing, but it uses a very specific image as its unit of replication, I guess you could say. It's the Pentagon. So it's like a little picture of the Pentagon building taken from above. At that time, George Bush was around and doing some, you know, kind of male aggression things with American military power. around the world, to say the least. And this was kind of my way of saying, well, maybe there's a way of disempowering that symbol of the Pentagon through sort of turning it into like sort of a doily, I guess you could say. But it's also kind of like about the idea of the propaganda of the military kind of razzling and dazzling us and making us feel all nationalistic. And this is kind of a representation of that, but also a criticism. And yeah, speaking of criticisms, when I said I was working in galleries in New York before I went to grad school, I was, I don't know if any of you guys have worked in galleries, but there's always all these empty frames around. And it's like, I decided to sort of like take some home and borrow them for my work. And at the time it was all kind of very intuitive, but now looking back on it, I think it was really referencing my relationship with art. I mean, my dad was an art collector. I was trying to be an artist. I mean, photography was quite huge as an art form between 2000, previous to 2001 when I got to New York, but until the time I started grad school. But then everyone started having, cameras on their phones, and everyone became a photographer. And so I thought, well, let me cut up these frames and turn them into sculptures and photograph them, and that will be my photography. And it kind of is a little bit of an insight into my mind of deconstruction as a way of being creative. And not only did I make these small sculptures, I also made installations you could walk through. This was in a luxury condo, quote unquote, in Crown Heights that wasn't being sold, and they brought artists in. And I thought that was perfect because for me, part of my criticism around art is its relation to commodity. It's the idea of like a really high value for just like a piece of paper. And I thought, well, let me utilize this language to talk about value and space and why certain spaces have value to certain people and not others. And as you can see in the first picture I showed, I always bring myself into the work, as I'm kind of this nexus in my perspective of like a hinge of where all these relational issues take place. The future, the past, the space that I'm in, my friends and my family, and all the actions I take to put all these objects in relation to each other is my art. And this piece kind of shows my struggling with photography, thinking about photography as a way to go back in time, to create an image that of course takes place before now, but it's like what happened after that. You can't really tell from the image, right? So this was sort of a joke that I was playing about the idea of a before and an after image. And I just thought, well, what if I just show the before and the after just continues to play basically forever after that. And also my investigations into photography as an object were kind of, I would say, all over the place. I only can show you a few tonight, but these were slides. I don't know if you guys have used slide film, but if slide film is kind of a positive film, so instead of making a negative, it makes a positive. So I shined colored light on the slides in a dark room, then rolled it back up into its canister and sent it to be developed. And then I could do these slide projections of the cameraless photography. And yeah, this was kind of about photography as telling a story, it's like you look at this image and you might ask yourself, is this a sunset? Is this like a TV screen? But it's actually not. It's just the kind of trace of a movement of light. And I liked that kind of dissonance between imagery and a trace of action, which all these things I'm telling you about, I choose them because they talk about building up to my textile practice, which is the place where I eventually brought all of my interests together. And then I was really interested in the idea of creativity, just as a a structure. So I saw these blank canvases in the hallway of my studio, and I put them in my studio, and I thought, well, what am I going to paint on these? Because that's what you do with canvases, right? But I was like, well, what if I did something else with the canvases? So I started creating these sculptures, and I made, I think, 10 sculptures. And I had my first solo show in Brooklyn. And along with the 10 sculptures, I made one piece based on each of the sculptures. So in this case, I took the contour of one of the sculptures and I cut out a piece of plywood and wrapped it in like another type of linen or canvas. And in this case, I took another sculpture and printed it out, the photograph, and then folded the photograph and pinned it to the wall using grommets. And so you can really see my interest in manipulating the photographic surface and thinking about how manipulating the surface can change the meaning of the original image. Again, me, and I decided to make a wearable outfit made out of blank canvases. So thinking, what are all the different things you can do with a material? You know, maybe there's so many assumptions of the ways things are to be used, but maybe there are other ways. And then I took a bunch of blank canvases and made these architectural installations. This particular one was in a huge loft with about 90 other artists, and I made basically a gallery within a gallery, and within that, I hosted performances, musical performances, and had kind of like my own programming within this other program. So there's this kind of layering of creativity and using my creative energy to host other people's creative energy, which is something I'm really committed to. And I do curate a lot, but a lot of these things have kind of fallen away when I went into textile work, because I'll explain later when I get there. But I was just really trying everything and really thinking about exploring ideas no matter what the media could be. I got these blank, basically drop cloths at a hardware store and created a slogan in a language that I kind of invented, and then placed them on 3 different signs on this hill in Ohio. It's part of a residency, and I really liked the idea of how you could create an artwork that was bigger than the artwork itself by sort of thinking about the space around it and the way that the different artworks related to the space and related to the sky and to the dirt and to each other. And this also kind of began my interest in public art. And I just, throughout this whole period, I was just really just trying to develop my voice, just trying everything, making mistakes, being challenged, running into problems. Every problem I ran into taught me something. And there were a lot of problems, a lot of stress, and a lot of anxiety, and a lot of like, is this going to work? But that was what made me learn how to do things, how to speak. It's like learning to speak through this coded language. And I also made a lot of videos. I'm not going to show you any videos, but this is a still from video where I stacked up a bunch of lunch boxes I inherited from my father and then knocked them all down. And it created this kind of crazy loud crashing sound because they're all metal, and there was a microphone with a looping pedal, and it just got, and at the time I was also doing a lot of music performance. My band, Doom Trumpet, you can see on the bottom there. I did a lot of music performing, solo performances with looping pedals, guitar, percussion, vocals, where I would layer myself, create the drum beat, create the bass line, create background vocals, all using all myself. And I just kept doing it until I kind of figured out my own way of doing it. And this was my pedal setup, my looping pedals, my delay pedals, my distortion pedals. And I kind of show you this because this is kind of how my art works. It's like my work is like an interface, basically. I take I take inputs, thoughts I have, impressions I have, ideas I have, and I put them through different processes and then see what comes out the other end. And that's kind of how I create reality for myself. Um, as many of you might have thought about reality, it's sort of, there, you know, especially going back to photography, there isn't just one reality, but this is a way for me to like tangibly manipulate inputs and ideas and then see them manipulated and transformed. It gives me a sense that I'm actually interacting with something real. Um, speaking of real, this is a slogan that I used a lot, the here and now, which is kind of an insight into my work. It's a lot of it is about the present moment, about all the different narratives moving through any particular moment, any particular time and space. And this is a set I made at an exhibition where it was sort of meant to be like a background set of a musical performance. And we did perform, my band, Doom Trumpet, performed on that round thing. I had added a couple more members. This is us. And we were, you may not really get it, but we were sort of dressed up to look like black and white TV people. Like that was the idea. And this is like black and white sort of. So back in the 60s, you know, they'd have these like music TV shows and there'd be like these lavish sets and the bands would play and there'd be all these cameras. And I like the idea of like just setting it all up like a show, but then only having the performance be for 30 minutes and then the whole remainder of the show, there just being nothing there. And just kind of having that trace or that spirit of what was there. So it's like it was here and now, yes, but that time is gone, but it's still here. And that kind of contradiction of time and space that we're all dealing with as humans and beings of all sorts. And so all those canvases that I used to make that room, I had them in my studio. I was like, what am I going to do with these? So I just thought again, what could I do with them? I cut them in every different way I could think of, and I created all new works from those old pieces. And recycling is a huge part of my work. I often make a piece and then fold it back in later into another piece and then take it apart, combine it. But this was, I would say, the work that was closest to my textile work in the sense that it's about taking something, cutting it up, reconfiguring it, and that's what textiles can do for me. And that's why I found myself moving into textiles pretty much exclusively, because there's so many ways you can manipulate it and change it. And I just keep adding more and more, and I'll tell you that about that in just a moment. This is another one of those blank canvases where I cut out the shape of my hand. And at the same time, going back, I was, to my interest in psychology, I was squishing paint between these wooden forms that are hinged. And I'm thinking, well, wouldn't it be cool if like I could make one of these for each of my friends or each person in the world, you know, and each one would be unique and each would sort of speak to the idea of the self. But then I kind of had like and that's definitely an impulse that I continue to think about is abstraction. But then I kind of had an aha moment and I said, well, maybe I could turn it into a grid and try to create an image, but the image would be kind of abstracted. So I took these blob, like spoonfuls of different colors of paint and placed them on little gridded lines. And this was my attempt at a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, which actually says more about me than something like this. So I think I kind of realized like, in order to talk about the self, you don't always have to run away from the self. You can actually go into the self and into those things that one holds in your heart, in your memory, in your mind, and your identity. I don't know if anyone can recognize this, but when I went really far back into myself, Super Mario was kind of one of the main things that was in there. It was like my little person that I got to control as a kid, and I got to see myself on a screen, and I got to act, and I could die and come back to life, and I could fly, and I could explore fantasy worlds. And so I just thought, well, like that's a good place to start, and I can kind of abstract it to talk about sort of the idea of the ephemeral within the self, I made this image on Photoshop, and somebody asked me, actually my friend Martin Estevez was curating the show, and he said, well, I like this piece for the show. And at the time, I saw another friend of mine had a picture of her cat woven into a blanket. And the blanket was sitting on her couch, and I could tell she loved the blanket. Her cat had passed away. This blanket reminded her of the cat. She could wrap herself in it, and she treasured it. And I thought to myself, that's the kind of photography I want to make. So I took this image and I turned it into a blanket. And that was the first textile piece I made. And it's the first piece in the show, Another World, which is the show where Heidi is. But I'm going to show you a couple more install shots before we take it back to Heidi. And yeah, I mean, at that time, I made this piece and I thought, well, that was really cool. Like, I took this step, not printing it on paper, and cutting it, but taking this image and thinking, well, what other ways could I produce this image that's not really considered art? And so I made this. I could fold it up, I could ball it up, it wouldn't get damaged. And I made 10, in the following year, I made 10 more, all from Super Mario Brother characters. I hope you guys could see that. I don't know, I can't really point at it, but it's his little overalls in the middle. He's mirrored from top to bottom, and his eye and his mustache and sideburns, and the red on top is his hat. If you can't see it, don't worry about it. Maybe you'll see it later. And then this is a little one at Halsey McKay Gallery. Not little, it's big, but the character in there is this guy who throws like bombs at you from the clouds. And this was my first show at Halsey McKay. And this piece was at Calico Gallery, where I had my first show of textiles. And this was my first show at Halsey McKay. It was a group show. And right here we have the piece Mario on the right. And my textile art, I'm going to wrap it up in just a few minutes so we can take questions, about 3 minutes, is really, really satisfying to me, because as you could see in my talk, I did so many things. I did music, I did video, I did sculpture, performance, architectural things, curating, photography. And what I found was through textiles, I could kind of do everything and more, and I could invent things. So it just became this Mario on the right just became like the very, birth of a language, of which I just keep adding to. It's been 7 years, but there's so much more I want to do with it. I think I can go at least 5 or 10 more years. I mean, who knows what's happening now has made me question art and made me question my relation to art and the world. But I just find that this interface, this textile interface, allows me to do so many things. So what I do is I take the images, the digital images, I send them to be woven in a mill in North Carolina, and they're sent back to me. And then once I get them, I can manipulate them using sort of traditional craft techniques in like sequences that I kind of think of as like computer code, where by doing many actions in a row, you sort of start creating unexpected results. So the piece on the right is just the straight up blanket, and the piece on the left is a sort of a collage with stuffing, and the piece in the middle is 3 different blankets that are stuffed and then intertwined. And you can see on the left, there's some embroidery, some fabric dye. The piece slightly to the right of that is a folded piece. And I started using some wooden structures to kind of give it shape. I'm just giving you an overview, and then maybe Heidi can walk around and show you the show. I also make wearable pieces. I cut holes in things. As you can see on the right, that's you might be able to tell that's Bugs Bunny. I don't know if you can, but I work with a lot of imagery from cartoons, from video games. Sometimes it's photographs of things I've experienced, like a meal that maybe when I was on vacation, maybe and then I take that imagery, I manipulate it in Photoshop, get it woven or printed onto fabric, then manipulate it and build it and construct it into something different and new. And that's kind of my process, is thinking about how a photograph can be broken down, the time between taking the picture and between presenting a finished piece. There can be so many steps along the way where the meaning is shifted and moved, and actually the meaning starts to actually get away from me and start to tell me things about what it's trying to be. And in this case, this is a piece at Socrates Sculpture Park called Digital Skin, and below are all the models that I used to figure out the shape. That piece is actually really large. I could walk underneath there easily. It'd be like way above my head. And there is even a narrative to this piece, that this was like a biotechnological being from the future that communicates through images on its skin. And that's what I mean about the meanings start presenting themselves to me. And I started seeing this deconstructive language not as only, you know, let's take something apart and see how meaningless we can make it, but actually let's take it apart, make it meaningless, and then start to grow meaning from it, which is essentially how I see my voice taking place, and also how I relate myself to the past and to my community. I sort of see myself as both an honorer of tradition, but also like a composter, or somebody who breaks things down and builds things back up. And this is the rest of the show. You see 3 sort of painting textiles, and then a sort of a figure who's on the ground made of like Looney Tunes, more Bugs Bunny. And the piece on the left, which ends the show, is a picture of my partner, Tanya Marquardt. And it's taken with multiple exposures of movement through time and space, and an exploration of gender fluidity and identity. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen, and maybe if there's 1 or 2, I think I've already talked about a few pieces, but we can either go into questions, or I could talk a little bit more about my show here. That was a lot of talking, but thank you all for listening.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm here in the gallery, and I just want to say, like, it feels like this is really the perfect show for this point in time, because we're all in this point where we're reimagining how we're going to exist in the world and live and connect and care for one another. And a lot of that is what I'm picking up on in the work and what you just spoke about. So I'm really glad that it can be here right now. For those of you who are watching, you can, for the question and answer part, I'll let you start thinking about any questions that you might have. You may either type your question into the Q&A chat box directly, and then I can read your question out loud, or you can make a note that you have a question, and then I can invite you to unmute yourself and ask your question, and have the chance to just talk more directly with David. I know that's something we really love experiencing when the artists are here in the gallery. So I want to give especially our students that chance if they're, you know, if they have any questions. So let's see here. We have a question. Can you talk a little bit more about going from 2 to 3 dimensions within the textile work? So maybe if there's something that you want me to focus on, I can direct the camera there.
Yeah, maybe you could focus on, I don't know if it's possible, but could you focus on the blue one over your shoulder, and then also the like mask one?
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe if you get a little closer to the blue one, you can kind of show it from like a side. Yeah, like a little bit from the side.
Sure.
So you can see this was really the first. Interesting, because before this, yeah, that's good. I actually was making all these flat pieces, right? And the funny thing about weaving is actually it's not really flat. It's actually the image is actually comprised of the textile. So it it already sort of invites a sculptural approach. And it's made up of all these tiny little threads. And when you cut them, they kind of all fray in this very dramatic and kind of scary way, especially when you might do it by accident. But I remember the first day I decided to just start cutting them. I think that was when the idea of like hands-off kind of approach to a photograph really went out the window. And I said, I can like cut through this, I can flip it around. There's an image on the back because they're weaving, so you have sort of the reverse image on the back. And in this case, I cut a bunch of shapes, sort of like a jigsaw puzzle, and then I layered them all on the floor and stuffed them with polyester and pinned it down with, and I think I sewed it with a machine actually. So this might be one of the first pieces I sewed with the machine. But I think it just the kind of freedom of moving between 2- and 3-dimensional space. I mean, right now we're kind of confronted with these flat screens all the time, which we're treating as if they're windows into other spaces, but actually they're just flat. And I'm really fascinated with the idea of like, well, what if our screens could be 3-dimensional? Like, what kind of states of consciousnesses could we enter into if we could record images on 3 dimensions and not just 2 dimensions? And I do think our minds are like our brains are places where images are stored in 3 dimensions and memories are stored in 3 dimensions. And one memory might be near another memory that might have taken place in a different time, but because our brains are so circuitous, they kind of blend these images together. So I mean, then maybe focus on the one on to the left of it, on the mask. Thank you. Yeah, that one, that was another one where I took a flat piece and I just thought, I was like looking at it and I was like, well, what can I do with this? Well, what if I fold it? Okay, well, if I fold it, isn't it just, and then let go, it's just going to fall down again and become flat again. So I started folding it and sewing it. And the original piece of fabric was symmetrical. So I folded one side and tacked it into place with a stitch and then did the exact same fold on the other side. This happens to be sort of a grid-like pattern, so I was able to do that. But it was just this kind of like, trying to get into that sort of meditative space of like creativity where you're like making sort of arbitrary movements with your body, with your mind, with your hands, and just trying to create something. You're not really sure what, but over time, something started to emerge, some sort of animalistic kind of organic shape. And then I kept having to undo it and redo it and flip it upside down and go backwards and just struggle with it, just struggling with the material, wrestling with it, just like I wrestled with all these other things I tried for the first time. And this is just one mask. I have about maybe 6 or 12 of them somewhere, and they've been shown. Take another question.
Yeah, one of the things I noticed in some of the writing that you did about the work for the show was that you talked about how you were physically manipulating this piece and folding it and mirroring it, kind of mimicking the sorts of moves you might make digitally in Photoshop, but then this was this physical manifestation of that kind of a process, like a tactile version of that manipulation that happens so quickly in the digital realm.
Yeah.
But that interplay between the digital and the physical feels really essential in your work. And there seems to be a relationship between weaving and pixels and the tapestry. There's a tapestry here that kind of is connected to the format of the mask, almost becomes the screen. And in our world, there's so many screens that we're seeing on a daily basis. So I guess I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that digital to physical relationship, and maybe in response to time, we have some questions about how long it takes you to make some of this work.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that's kind of that kind of gives me an interesting way into that question, which is much of my work is about patience and persistence, and which is something that digital reality does not care about, because as you all know, oh, as any artist knows who works with digital, say Photoshop, there's the undo button. But in reality, the undoing things isn't always possible. The nice thing about textiles is you can undo things. It just takes a long time. But it's this kind of bodily and mental investment. And I think before I was using the word struggle, but this idea of struggle, it might have a negative connotation, but it could also have a positive connotation in the sense that it means to build something, to figure something out, how something can work. And through taking something digital and sort of making a nod to the idea that the digital is sort of something that an artificial intelligence can generate any kind of image you want. You just type in a few keywords and it will, pull it from Google Images. It can even make an artwork for you. It can make it in any style. But like, what's the difference between that and a human who has much different concerns than a computer? A computer is trying to, execute a command of some sort. A person, depending on the person, might have many more nuanced and mysterious intentions, and is able to solve problems in a much higher level, especially when you combine all the humans working together and all their minds. We can do some amazing things together that machines would never figure out. So in terms of, but then, just to jump back, it's like I like things to feel like they're sort of both digital and organic or analog. And I also like to think about the past and the future and to sort of play with the idea of, well, when was this made? Was this made in the 30s, or was this made in like 3030? Like what, and to kind of think of trying to not only use technology, but reimagine what technology could do. But in terms of how long it takes, I mean, it takes a long time. That was actually one of the huge realizations of, as I spoke about my time in New York, running around, going to all these shows, going to these music shows, hanging out with people. Once I found textile art, actually, and I wanted to make it, like I wanted to make a lot of art, I didn't really go out anymore. I actually had to work on my studio. And it was kind of this like aha moment. Oh, art's not about going to openings. Being an artist, I mean, it could be, but not being, it's about a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of thinking, a lot of struggling, a lot of experimenting, a lot of making mistakes, and throwing them out or cutting them up and incorporating them into something else. But for me, I'm very interested in meditation. I meditate every morning, and I've gone on meditation retreats. And so I actually was really drawn to textile work because I like spending lots of time alone meditating, and then bringing those feelings of meditation into the work and allowing the work to also manipulate and change me, and kind of working together. I really like what you said, by the way, about Heidi, about caring for each other, thinking about the worlds we want to live in. Like, those things take work too, and computers aren't going to figure that out for us. I don't think.
True. We have another question here from Julia. She's asking, can you elaborate more on how photography helped to shape your perspective of art and reality? And if you want me to direct the camera somewhere else, I can, or leave it here.
And maybe you could like rotate it 180 degrees toward the black and white piece on the other wall. But that's a great question. It's so so many ways actually, because I didn't mention, but one of my jobs is I photograph art for a living, and I document other people's art for galleries, museums, artists. And I think a lot about the way that somebody looks at something and the way that somebody captures something tells the story of that thing. And um, like one of the things about that I was going to say earlier about when I was a kid, a lot of people, like to read the comics and whatever. I would sit there and read the or look at the photographs of like appliances and stuff, and sort of think to myself, well, what do I think about this refrigerator? Like, why do I think that? What was the person who took this picture trying to convey about this refrigerator? Like, does it look big? Does it look modern? Is it bright? Is it, like, can I see the texture? And I mean, I'm pretty much fascinated by textures, by lighting, by the way, things are framed, compositions, and how there are all these like sort of very subtle, nuanced ways of telling a story that people can hardly even put into words, but we see all the time through Instagram and Facebook now, and we know the power of photography to shape the way people think and feel about things. And this particular image is called Seven Moves, and it's as I said, my partner Tanya Marquardt, who's a gender non-conforming writer and performer. They went into our studio and was holding this canvas stretcher bar, and we did these 7 movements with 7 different photographs, which were layered into one image. And I really enjoyed the way that it sort of told different stories depending on who was looking at it. You could see this as some sort of apocalyptic sci-fi character, kind of getting ready for some sort of battle, or perhaps maybe just somebody building something, or perhaps some kind of multiple armed creature with antennae pointing out of it. And I just love the open-endedness of this work. And I'm excited to work more with members of my community actually as subjects in the work, and also to honor their desires of the ways they want to see themselves. And using photography to do that, I think is a great way. So yeah, it's a great question.
We have another question. What Bugs Bunny art piece do you like the best? You mentioned that a couple of these had Bugs Bunny in them, and was one of them this guy's here in the center?
Yeah, you could show that one. Well, that one's kind of funny because I never really put 2 and 2 together, but he kind of looks like Bugs Bunny because he has those 2 like ears. But when I originally made that piece, I was thinking about this narrative that I was developing, which is the cave dwellers and the cloud minders. And this piece is called Cave Dweller. And in my imagination, if you pan down a little, you can see a little more of Bugs Bunny too, because it's on his like leg. Yeah, down there. Those are his Bugs Bunny's eyes and nose. But yeah, down there. Yeah, like on the very. But I thought, well, in this kind of speculative reality that I'm imagining, these beings living in caves have no heads because they don't really need to think too much. So they just have all these extra appendages like arms. And that's what those things on top are. But they could also be seen as like antennae or perhaps ears of some, or sensors. And it kind of relates to my piece at the Socrates Sculpture Park, which was called Digital Skin, where beings could kind of communicate through their skin, through showing images, maybe even selling advertising time to people to show imagery, depending on where they're located. And yeah, and in that world, the cloud minders would only have heads and just be these floating heads. And so they kind of like were symbiotic in a way. They needed each other, but both of them were kind of like fragmented. And yeah, and then on the back of that piece, there's a kind of maybe you could, if you could show the back of that piece, and then I know what you could show after that. There's an image, like a surprise image of another character. I don't know if any of you guys watching can recognize what that is in the middle of the back of the cave dweller. Anyone recognize it? I know you can't speak, but it is the Tasmanian devil, which has been sort of manipulated in Photoshop. Kind of going back to what Heidi was saying about how I like to fold and cut and paste things. So that's the Tasmanian devil. So I kind of think like it's sort of like Bugs Bunny's alter ego, you know, like on his back. And it's also kind of like a back tattoo. It's really, it shows his aggressive side. And then if you like pan it to the right, to the future self piece on the wall, you can see that if that's the cave dweller, over here you can see one of the cloud minders, which is just kind of a floating head in the middle there, with kind of a wing. Oh, the sculpture? No, I meant the one, the face. Well, the face one. The sculpture I could talk about, but I was kind of drawing the link between the two creatures, the floating head being the one in the middle, which is a cloud minder, kind of living in the clouds, just floating around. And in my narrative, these cloud minders, they hold all the information. Like, you know how we talk about the digital cloud. I kind of extrapolate that to make it like these literal cloud information storage devices. And this character is kind of like the king of that world.
I'm going to bring it up closer so people can maybe see some of the detail.
Yeah, there's a lot of embroidering. There's crystals in the eyes, Swarovski crystals. There's embroidery. It's stuffed, so it's got a bit of a three-dimensional feel. That's upholstered, you could say. Yeah, and yeah. So that's kind of like, I just wanted to show you kind of the tension between this character and the one on the floor, and how they kind of are in the symbiotic relationship. I could tell you quickly how that particular piece, it's called Future Self. And a lot of times, as I said, I kind of think of myself as like a composter. And this is one of those cases where I had all these extra pieces left over from other pieces, and I had this face, and the face is a screenshot of a YouTube video of a video game called Bus Simulator. And I'm really fascinated with like simulation games where people spend all this time playing these video games that actually simulate reality. And that's kind of like a little bit of a insight into my work, because I'm trying to simulate some kind of alternate reality through my work. And in a way, a video game is kind of like a photo, like it's pretending to speak about reality, but actually it's just a fabricated reality. And this particular little kid, he just walked into the bus, but he wouldn't move. And he just stood there and blocked all the people from getting on the bus. So I took a screenshot of him and used him as my character, along with all these other scraps from other work. The background cloud is actually the cloud from Super Mario Brothers that's been, the black cloud. It's been like layered and doubled and added and kind of given like a sunset gradient treatment. But even though the piece has a very specific narrative, the piece is meant to be open to other narratives. In the same way, I try to, as I was saying, try to create this simulated reality. I really like my viewers to kind of put themselves in the role of like an anthropologist trying to derive whatever meaning they can get from it. And I don't really put my meaning above anyone else's meaning, if you know what I mean. So that covered two pieces, which is good.
All right, so we're getting close to the end of our time here. Does anyone else have any last burning question that they would like to ask David this evening? We had some really great questions, and it was just nice to hear you talk about some of the pieces that are here in the gallery. Before we wrap up tonight, I do just want to share with everyone who's watching that when you visit the gallery, either online or person, you will find audio guides that David recorded for many of the pieces, as well as activities that will help you kind of engage and respond to the artwork on a deeper and more personal level. So you can kind of apply some of these ideas to your own life in really exciting ways. Currently, in the gallery, we have a limited occupancy of 10 guests at one time, and that's a reflection of, you know, the world we're living in right now. We are accepting timed reservations for visits by Millersville University students, faculty, and staff. As the fall progresses, I will be sure to keep the website updated and send an email when or if we get to the point where we are able to invite guests from the community. Please feel free to reach out by email with any comments or questions. I know David's open to feedback and things that you discover or kind of observations, especially he's easy to reach on Instagram. If you do make it to the gallery, we have some fun pins that we were able to create based on the piece right back here. So that's a little gallery swag for you. And we also have some activity packs where you can create using some materials that we provide for you.
Yeah, if there aren't more questions, I did want to mention that I don't know if it's possible if you could like type in the website, or if not,
yeah.
the website is kind of like a show in itself. It has all this extra stuff, and it's sort of like designed to be viewed at home. It's not just like kind of a shallow version of the original. It's actually got more than the original show. And also I'm going to be doing, this show is going to be traveling to SUNY Old Westbury in Long Island in January, and both here at Millersville and at Old Westbury, I'm going to be doing some workshops with students. And if you all are interested, just reach out to Heidi or to me. My Instagram is David B as in boy Smith _. Yeah, and feel free to reach out to me there with any more questions or just to stay in touch. And I hope to connect with you guys more.
We did have one other question about the Zoom session. Will it be posted to the Millersville site? It was recorded. We'll have to just process that and talk about how it will be shared. The website where this exhibition is live is just eckertartgallery.org. So you can find David's Instagram on there. You can find contact info for me and the university, all on that website. And yeah, so I just want to thank you again, David, for sharing your world with us, and thank you to all the attendees who joined us this evening. Any last words or anything?
Just sending creativity and positivity to everybody, and all the best to building your own worlds inside and out and in your communities, and for the future for everyone. So thank you for having me tonight and for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a good night, everyone.